Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Dodd, and I'm the creator of the webcomic book I Bite New York. Today, I'm going to show you my process, or a good chunk of it anyway, for how I make a panel of that comic. The comic is made with physical artwork in pen and colored pencil that is digitally manipulated. The digital processes involved would be worthy of a video in themselves, and they can vary a lot from panel to panel, but I can show you some of the snapshots from the beginning of that process. In this panel, there is a character that I have shown before, and so I need to draw him as consistently as possible with what I've already drawn before. So I'm using the original artwork from that panel as a reference. My first step is to rule off an 8" by 8" square on sketch paper. I do all my preliminary work on sketch paper so that I do not add pencil marks unnecessarily to the Bristol board of the final artwork. Pencil marks, even when erased, may interfere with the application of colored pencil. My main tools at this stage are a ruler, a soft B pencil, a mechanical pencil, and a kneadable eraser. And vinyl erasers also for harder marks or marks in tighter areas. Once I've completed the rough sketch, I trace the image onto tracing paper. In order to make the painter's tape I use less tacky, I stick it to my shirt or my skin first before applying it to the paper. But if the sketch paper tears at this point, it doesn't really matter much. Once the tracing is completed, I carefully remove the tracing paper from the sketchbook. Once the tracing is completed, I carefully remove the tracing paper from the sketchbook. I draw an identical 8 by 8" square on the Bristol board upon which the final pen and colored pencil artwork will be done. On the back of the tracing paper, I rub soft graphite along the lines. I use pencil graphite instead of carbon paper because the graphite is easier to erase and isn't as dark, but is still dark enough to see. I then tape the tracing paper to the Bristol board and trace back over the lines with mechanical pencil. The mechanical pencil lead is both much harder than my B pencil, and the tip is quite tiny, perfect for making a precise impression. When I am done tracing over the image, I remove the tracing paper from the Bristol board very carefully, making sure not to tear the board with the tape. I am then ready to start inking the board. I typically use Sakura Micron 0408 and Graphic 1 pens, and sometimes use a Pentel pocket brush pen for special applications, but not for the main inking. I am also going to make a special night sky image separately from the main image, and then composite that into the background of the image digitally. In this case, I'm doing everything directly on sketch paper, but since the sketch paper is white and the night sky is black, I'm going to do all of my colors the inverse of what they will be in the final image. I've created a chart of what all my colored pencils look like when they are inverted, so I can pick precisely the color I want. The only exception is the moon. It will be done in normal colors and picked out from the sky background later. This method keeps me from having to go over the whole sky with black colored pencil and gives me better results. Since I Bite New York is a comic about vampires, necessarily most of the scenes will occur at night, and I use this technique for more than just skies. I use Corenda ash colored pencils, which are expensive, but I love them. As you can see, I generally use magnification when creating my art. My eyes used to be razor sharp at close ranges, but I'm 65 now, so they need a little optical help. Switching back to the main art on the Bristol board, it's time for inking. I use the graphic 1 for main outlines and then the 08 and 04 for details. Once I'm done inking, I make sure the ink is dry by using a blower. While the Micron ink is very fast drying, there's always the possibility that some little dot somewhere has not completely dried. Once dried, I rub the image down with a kneadable eraser to eliminate any pencil marks, following it up with a vinyl eraser if needed for tougher marks. The ink work is now finished, but I need to scan the ink work in separately before starting in on the colored pencils, because I will want to digitally enhance the blackness of the ink lines later, and it makes certain Photoshop processes easier. I then scan in the inks panel on my A3 scanner and save it as a separate document. I also scan in the sky image I did earlier. Afterwards, it's time for the colored pencils. Just like watercolors or any other medium, colored pencils have their own tricks and techniques. One thing to be aware of is that any pencil marks on the paper may interfere with the application of the colored pencil. The pencil will simply skip over the groove created unless you push the point of the pencil intentionally into the groove. This effect can be used intentionally, as I did, to make the hair of the character Nimue for her portrait. Also, you can blend colored pencils together, but it is important to note that you should do each layer fairly lightly and build up layers instead of trying to get the desired color saturation all at once. If you're only doing a single color, you can go as heavy as you like. This is the completed color pencil artwork. I seem to have had a problem placing the image in front of the camera lens, but you can still see it. Something to note is that the bricks next to the windows, which you can barely see, are also done in inverted colors like the sky. This is because the black background buildings will be almost completely dark, except for some digital brickwork on the nearest building. As with the moon in the sky the image, the windows are done in normal colors because they are lighter, and they will be digitally separated from the inverted building. As you will see, the final physical artwork does not bear much resemblance to the final work except for the foreground figure and the general shapes. You have to know what needs to be done physically in order to facilitate the digital artwork, and what parts are best to do digitally. The final colored pencil artwork is then scanned in as a separate document. Up next are snapshots from the beginning of the digital process. As I mentioned, the digital processes are worthy of a video in themselves, but one process is repeated in each and every panel. I open up the colored pencil artwork in Photoshop, then open up the inks only document and copy the inks only document onto a layer on top of the colored pencils. I then align the inks document with the colored pencil document. I then use brightness and contrast to darken the inks and then select the black color in that layer and create a new layer and use the bucket tool to fill the selection with pure saturated black. This gives the inks the desired darkness and also covers up places where the colored pencils went over the inks. I then just deselect the original ink layer so that the colored pencil shows through. Next, I'm going to composite the sky onto the background. I copy the sky onto a new layer, copy out the image of the moon onto a separate layer, invert the sky layer so that the night colors are now as I planned them to be, and put a yellow blur behind the moon to give it a glow. As you can tell, this is the only beginning of the process, and this video is already quite long. Here's the final panel 30 after I've done all the digital processes to it. I have committed myself to comics, to serial narrative art as I like to call it, because I believe in its story-telling potential. One person can write a novel, and I have written them, but who reads these days? On the other hand, it takes huge teams and massive amounts of capital to make movies or create computer games. Print comic books are usually made by small teams, but it is still possible for one committed person to create comics or manga. It is the last frontier for the sole creator-auteur with a vision. The corporate enterprises who create movies and games will express the views and priorities of corporate boards and organizations. I happen to believe that all great art is fundamentally the vision of one person, and occasionally those corporations will allow that one person control. There is still room in the world for the great film directors who have so much clout that they can demand that their vision be followed. But most movies and games are not like that, games especially. In comics, it is still possible, if difficult, for one person with all the necessary talents to do everything. This is not to diminish the value of teams. Pretty much every great movie ever made was the work of a talented team, and in movies it is hardly possible for one person to be good at everything required. But one artist needs to be the guiding spirit. If you also believe in the potential of serial narrative art as great art and storytelling, please support my work on my Ko-Fi page. The link is in the description, and you can also see my comics Sulphur County and Cocktail Hour with the Mice there as I work to complete on episode 1 of I Bite New York. Thank you.